Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
The attractive pink-headed duck was known to science for a mere 150 years, the last wild individual being shot in Bihar in 1935. Extinction is part of the evolution of life on Earth, but our actions have hastened its pace manifold. We never think that our actions will result in the extinction of a species or the consequences thereof, believing that we are far removed from any adverse repercussions and safe. We persecuted the pink-headed duck in various ways, collecting it for aviaries and museums and destroying its habitats until one day it disappeared. Was human avarice to be blamed, or were its evolutionary dice loaded against it? Questions worth studying, and the very ones that this book examines.
To find a rare bird is the ultimate dream of ornithologists and birdwatchers, but doing it requires a combination of skills, including an understanding of habitats, animal behavior, and people skills, as well as plain old good luck. In this episode, authors Shashank Dalvi and Anita will be in conversation with Atul Jain, Radhika and Aasheesh Pittie, contributors to the book The Search for India's Rarest Birds, who will speak about the challenges of species discovery and what makes a bird rare. They will also explore conservation issues and solutions to prevent such rare species from going beyond the brink, as well as where the next raft of discoveries could come from. This episode was adapted from an event that took place at the Bangalore International Centre in December of 2024.
Good evening and welcome to a very birdie discussion on solving avian mysteries. I am Anita and I run Indian Pittie books. The discussion of this evening takes off from our newest book from the Indian Pittie imprint, The Search for India's Rarest Birds. Indian Pittie is India's first dedicated book imprint for bird lovers, nature lovers, conservationists and policymakers. Over the past 2 years, we've published books such as The Living Air by Aasheesh Pittie, Scaling Up by Zai Whitaker, The Birds of the Delhi Area by Sudhir Vyas, and most recently, the memoirs of Dr. Asad Rahmani, Living with Birds. The Search for India's Rarest Birds is our newest title, which is being launched here today. This event has come together thanks to the support we've had from the Bangalore International Centre, from the Centre for Wildlife Studies, as well as the Champaka bookstore. Thank you all for supporting us. To find a rare bird is the ultimate dream of birdwatchers, naturalists, ornithologists, but doing so requires many things. It requires one to understand the habitat and to do two very diverse things. One, to know the animal or bird you're looking for well, and to also have very good people skills. You can't leave that behind, as well as a lot of good luck. Across all the essays in this book, we join naturalists, birdwatchers, conservationists, and they show us how they track down some of India's rarest birds. So the book will take you through the dense jungles of northeastern India, the channels of the Sundarbans, the mysterious landforms of the Deccan, all in search of India's rarest birds. I'm delighted that some of the writers are here to really talk about the book.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. So, as a birder, when we think about any new bird or any lifer, until we get the bird, it's always rare. But then there are certain birds which makes you drool, makes you dream. Certain species for which makes you really work hard. And most of the rare birds which are covered in this book are one of those birds. So, like for certain birds, before I think I started attempting Banasura laughing thrush in 2013, but I could not reach the right habitat. Didn't get the permissions to go to the right habitat. But it takes a while to get to these places, and eventually it was really rewarding when last year we managed to get and see the bird. But what makes the bird rare is a very interesting aspect. So when you look at, let's say, a bird like Bougainvillea, the bird itself is very rare. In the sense, it has a very narrow distribution, found only in one valley, very few in numbers, and probably it's one of some of the last pairs which are still holding on to it for like last few years, and then the numbers might crash. We never know. We have seen the bird outside that one valley, but never really seen them in good number. There are birds like white-billed heron, which has a very wide distribution all the way from Bhutan to Myanmar. But within that landscape, the bird is rare because it's a large-bodied bird, it needs large fishes to feed on, a lot of disturbance in the habitat, a lot of dams coming up in its river, so the river ecosystem has changed. That makes the bird rare. Birds like, sometimes there could be birds like a smooth-throated babbler. Again, a small distribution, but extremely common bird there. But you have to crack the bird in a different way. For example, Atul was there with me when in 2015, when we cracked the song of the bird for the first time. And that made that bird easy. Till then, the bird was like, I remember sitting 2.5 days just to make a single recording of that bird before that. And there are many examples like this. For example, there could be things like logistical issues like Nicobar's Copsa. You have to go through multiple logistical hoops till you get to the right place. And then you have to figure out the right strategy to see the bird. Then there are birds like Jordan's courser. The birds like Jordan's courser are one of those birds, again a wide distribution, but you need to know the exact right habitat and right strategy to look for the bird in the right time of the day. So that makes that bird rare. So there are multiple examples, multiple ways of looking at the bird. The birds can be common in the right habitat, but it can be still rare until we find them for the first time.
Absolutely. I think there are many aspects to it. I mean, it's a whole matrix of possibilities, I think, in many ways. And I think the other thing which we also have to think about, and we'll be thinking about this a lot more in the years to come, is the impact of human actions on rarity. I think we are probably the humans influence rarity and will increasingly influence rarity to a greater degree as the years go by. And I'm going to turn to Aasheesh, who wrote this beautiful essay on the pink-headed duck. I think among the earliest examples of a duck whose rarity essentially has been shaped by human action.
Yeah, nobody in this generation has seen the pink-headed duck. I mean, it's not seen since 1935. But of the rarest two birds in this book, may I take the honor of having seen the Jordan's courser? So, yeah, that was just luck. And if I may just share that story a little bit.
Aasheesh, it's like harder you work, luckier you get.
So there was a conference in Coimbatore, and Richard Grimmett and the Inskips were all here. And we went birding, and we went to Rolapadu from there, and we also went to this Jordan courser area. And it's a nocturnal bird, so you see it in the night, and it's like searching for a pin in a haystack. We didn't even know its call then, and there was this poacher turned forest guard who actually discovered the bird. And Bharat writes about it in the book. And it was difficult to persuade him to come with us, but we managed to do that. And the man had a headlamp, and he had a toy sort of thing which made a rattling sound. And he used to play this sound just to sort of mesmerize the bird. So every bird that was around got mesmerized. Many times we said it's there, but it was a red wattle lapwing. And then it was just there. It is just miraculous that one sees the bird. And all of us saw it, and it was very new, and Aitana was very careful. So Richard sat down. Richard is very good at sketching. And he sat down, took out his notebook. He said, no, let's move back. You can't sketch here. So I remember we went back to the jeep, and Richard sketched it there. So that was a fabulous memory. Sorry to deviate. So the pink-headed duck lived for just about 150 years after being discovered. Evolutionarily, it's a much older duck, but it's known to science only for about 150 years. I'll read out a passage from my essay, which also speaks about some of the causes of species becoming extinct. One thing you must realize is extinction and rarity of species today is hindsight. In 2020, it's always 2020 hindsight. They should have done this. Why didn't they do that, etc. But 150 years ago, people didn't know that it was going to get extinct. And so here is how things unfolded for the lovely, poor, pink-headed duck. In an age when hunting non-human life was considered a sport and wilderness areas were either combed for fur or feather targets in the dubious pursuit of this frivolous sport, or out of the necessity of providing protein for the pot, the pink-headed duck was pursued for its rarity. Rarity is a magnet for both charlatans and connoisseurs. The latter covet it for its lustre and for the fame it will bring, the former for the easy lucre it promises. As far as rare forms of non-human life are concerned, the combination of these two leads to the end of the road for an endangered species. The bird was not a victual delight, except to Thomas Jerdon, who said it is excellent eating. But it was persecuted for the trade. Collectors and museums were a ready market for unscrupulous trappers and hunters, for they paid handsomely. The shy and reclusive hermit of forest pools did not stand a chance against this unrelenting persecution and rapacity. The last wild bird was shot in 1935 in the Darbhanga district of Bihar. There were several subsequent claims of sightings in the wild by different people from different parts of the country, but no one presented a clinching evidence and hence they were not accepted. Many confounded the red-crested pochard, a similar looking bird, with the rare one and foundered. In the opaque mistiness of dawn, crouched amongst tall reeds near still forest pools, the eyes could trick one into agreeing with what the mind wanted to believe. Julian Hume makes a strong case that collectors escalated the extinction of the pink-headed duck. Public and private zoos were popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in India, England, and the rest of Europe. Ornamental creatures were their prized possessions, sourced from agents who had global contacts in far-flung continents. It was a trade that paid rich dividends. Despite the heavy demand for the pink-headed duck, live specimens trickled in very slowly to the Indian or British markets, a sure sign of its unsocial habits, unlike other waterfowl, and more tellingly of its rarity. They were trapped in districts of Goalpara in Assam and in Purnia in Bihar, in Benua Char, again Bihar, in Rangpur, Bangladesh, in Dhubri, Assam, across the floodplains of the Ganga and the Brahmaputra in India and Bangladesh. Whatever birds survived the arduous sea voyages, there is no documentation of the number that perished at sea, died in captivity, despite being held in aviaries that had seemingly excellent conditions for their survival. The birds were long-lived, some surviving more than 12 years in captivity, but they did not breed, much to the chagrin of their bird-fancying captors, one of whom exclaimed in frustration that they were very stupid birds because they refused to breed. Snatched from their tropical homes and incarcerated in temperate ones, it was as though the bars of their aviaries, constricting their horizons, switched off freedom's regenerative dynamo. Robbed of a raison d'etre, captive drakes displayed listlessly, lifting their fading carnation heads skyward, forcing that procreational wheeze from their peculiar tracheae in a primeval, hardwired display of a hapless, poignantly mortal pantomime. And one by one they died. They died in London Zoo. They died in Lilford Park, Northamptonshire. They died in Calcutta Zoological Gardens. They died in Berlin Zoo. They died at the Chateau de Clare, Normandy, which itself was destroyed by German bombs in World War II. They died in Connecticut, USA, and they perished in Fox Warren Park, Cobham, England. Their skins became prized possessions in various museums' collections. Neither did they survive the efforts of the zoophile Ezra brothers. Now, who they were, you'll read in the chapter. So, does that answer?
Yeah, I think it answers. Clearly, human impact has reduced them from a duck in the wild to
Yes.
museum specimens. And I think we were just talking before this panel. I mean, as rare as this duck is, and the fact that we only have specimens of it, the treatment of some of these specimens is truly alarming. And I think I'll have Shashank share an amazing story of an incident that took place in
So there was in the museum when some of the guys showed up, and there was like some specimens were kept on display, and to the curator's horror, someone picked up the pink-headed duck by its bill. And it's like, first of all, there are very few skins in the world. Then there are, it was appalling, obviously. And of course, that guy was thrown out of the museum promptly. But yeah, Atul also had another funny incident with the specimen in museum.
Yeah, well, I had gone to Patna for work, and I said, okay, since I have time, I'll go to the Patna museum. That was long ago. And on the way, I entered the zoological section, and right in the middle of the skins and all the preserved birds, there was in the middle pink-headed duck in the glass case. I think that was a wow. Okay, so that's where the wow moment came in. That okay, look, there is a pink-headed duck. At least I saw it dead.
It's the kind of reverence with which birdwatchers regard the species is clearly not matched by the state with which they are preserved in some of our museums, but that's another story.
Anita, but just like pink-headed duck, like North Carolina parakeet is one of the examples where collectors went and collected until the bird went completely extinct.
Which sort of ironically goes against.
And in fact, the last collector who collected last 13 individuals, he wrote about it in his journal saying that, oh, there are 3 flocks here right now. I'm just going to collect only one of them and leave these birds on its fate. And the next day he went and collected the last 2 flocks. And that anyway, these birds can't survive in wild. I just collected.
Wow. Well, rather sad.
This is one way. This is one side of the story where something is rare already rare. But then if you talk about the passenger pigeon, that's just an horrendous, amazingly horrendous story of what humanity can do. I mean, clouds of pigeons that darkened the skies when flying overhead for 2-3 days, and guns became so hot shooting them that they had to be thrown away and more guns taken to shoot them.
And not only the bird went extinct, it changed the forest structure of Northern American forest completely, because it's a frugivore bird which created the forest in North America. And once that bird went extinct, and in that number, it just changed the entire forest structure up there.
True. I mean, I think humans, we have not covered ourselves with glory, but I think we will move from there to look at how nature can also shape, I think, rarity of a species. And I think I'm going to pull Radhika in to talk a little bit about, because the species that she wrote about, I think its fate was certainly determined partly by a terrible event in the early part of the century. Yeah.
So I went looking for the Nicobar megapode in Great Nicobar. And for those who haven't heard about this bird, this is a bird that looks like a brown chicken. It isn't much to look at. It has a red head, but it has these massive, massive feet. It's not tasty as well. It has these massive feet.
That's what. Sorry. Okay.
Please clarify.
I think you should clarify that.
I should clarify this. So when people went and collected, even AOU went and collected the specimen in, I think, 1880s. Just before he actually went and collected Narcondam hornbill as well, in the same expedition. He wrote about it in his journals that how the taste was very rubbery of the bird, right? Yeah.
Okay, you're off the hook. So he's off the hook, yeah.
He didn't mind the eggs, though. I remember reading that.
They're still harvested by...
So as I was saying that there's this chicken-like bird, but it has these giant, not giant really, large feet with which it builds these giant mound nests. It collects sand from the coast and it collects leaf litter and shells and puts together these mound nests and it builds over it year after year. And I think the smallest mound nest I saw in Great Nicobar was as high as my shoulder. And the largest towered over me. So these are huge nests. And most of them build these nests really, really close to the shore. So in 2004, when the tsunami hit the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, it really ravaged most of them. The tsunami, as everyone knows, was the largest earthquake that happened in Asia. It's one of the largest world disasters. It hit 14 countries. 2 lakh people died. But it also destroyed all these nests. That single event, which scientists now I learned later called the stochastic event, destroyed about 70% of the population. So in 2021, when from Round Glass Sustain, we went to look for the bird, we already knew that this was going to be a real challenge. And Shashank was telling me there were other events also that have entirely led to declines of populations.
Not for the megapod, in megapod's case, but there is a bird called as Cozumel thrasher, which is found on this Cozumel Island east of Yucatan Plateau in Mexico. And there are a series of thunderstorms and cyclones which hit that island multiple times back to back. And this bird went extinct just because of these kind of stochastic events. So there are examples like those where the population, the species have gone extinct because of natural calamities.
So for my chapter, I spoke to K. Shivakumar, who's a professor at Pondicherry University, who did his PhD on the megapod, and he did it before the tsunami. So after the tsunami hit, he went back, and for those who know, Ravi Shankaran is a legend in ecological wildlife conservation circles. They both went back to look for the megapod, and what they saw shocked them. And maybe I can read out an excerpt that really explains well what happened. In 2005, when Shivakumar and Shankaran traveled back to a tsunami-ridden island for a survey, they noticed that their field site was underwater. 90% of the ground nesting birds' mound nests are built 30 meters from the shore, just above the high tide line. In 1994, Shivakumar had counted at least 35 active mounds along Galathea Bay. Most were washed away. A single event had plummeted the bird's population by about 70%. I could only cry. There was nothing left, not a single person I knew, or a tree I had seen, he said. It was also, unfortunately, the last time Shivakumar would meet his guru, Ravi Shankaran. In 2009, the bird lost its most vocal champion. Shankaran, who had been instrumental in its conservation, died of a sudden heart attack near his home in Coimbatore. He goes on to talk about how difficult it was for him personally to see the bird's population fall. And he later talks about how the megapod gave him his career, really. But I'm not sure if I can save the bird, he says in a moment of rare vulnerability. The species is going down in front of me, and I am helpless.
That is, I think there's a lot of pathos in that story and in, I think, Shivakumar's recollections of what was and what now is post-tsunami. From there, we move on to something on a lighter note, and I will turn to Atul because, and to ask him this question as to how does the effect of rarity on twitchers? I think it's like in my opinion, it's like the eye of Sauron. It keeps drawing you in, and it's like a black hole into which there is no exit. Atul.
Okay, first of all, let me answer what's a rarity from a twitcher standpoint. So that's very important. So for me, it's very simple. Anything which is 1150 beyond, 1151 onwards, is a rarity, right?
Well, 1151 in terms of the bird list.
The bird list, like total birds approximately in India are about 1400 plus, right? And anything, which is coming after 1250 or 1150, that's definitely is rare birds. Rest everything what they talked about, is the rare birds, localized, localized, not rare, right? You just go and you tick it, right? So you see it. So at least from our standpoint, okay. I think One good comment long ago, when I was got into birding, and there was a gentleman called Suman, right? He was in Kolkata, and I said, okay. He said, okay, teachers have some value. I said, how? I said, at least they know and they tell the bird exists. So I think somewhere, we do help in terms of, what's there. And at least we report in terms of what has been seen. Otherwise, I think teaching is just basically a little bit of, frivolous sport, just to kind of, go around here and there and see new things. But definitely, I think for me, what has worked is to actually go into the wild, especially with, Shashank and my friend Ramki, who's no more, of course. But we have been going and we are really enjoying what we have done.
Which sort of, that's so far we've talked about a lot of objectives in terms of what defines rarity and, what is the context within which a birder sees a bird as a rarity. I'm just going to step back a little bit and talk and ask and put out a question to all the panelists in terms of how do you actually formulate a quest to go out and seek a rare bird? And, and there have been quests for many years. I think the Jordan Scusa is an excellent example of a bird that was quested for a very long time. And, many stalwarts, including the great Salim Ali, also went and tried looking for the bird but did not find it. And of course, as Bharat Bhushan explains in his essay, the crux of it was the strategy. And as long as and for those so minded, it was the fact that the bird was seen as belonging to the Cursorius genus and not to the Rhinopolis genus that caused the search strategy to be horribly wrong until the 80s. And as Bharat Bhushan writes in his essay, he talks about how the minute they started looking at the bird as belonging to the Rhinopolis genus, which meant it was both crepuscular and would be active at night, and a forest bird, and it's not a lapwing of the plains, right? It's not a cursorial bird of the plains, but of the forests just below the hills. And I think it's important to it's a beautifully written essay in terms of how that search was sharpened and how it was that insight that actually led to the rediscovery of the species. But, that is a combination of many things at play here, and which brings me to the question that I have to ask this panel. Finding or formulating a quest to see a rare bird, is it art or is it science?
Sometimes science misleads, as happened with the Jordan's Causa. But it is art or a type of art which leads you to the bird, which is also written by Bharat in his essay, where a conversation with a tribal actually clicked in his mind that it might be a forest bird because the name of the bird in Telugu was related to forest. So he realized that there is something different here. So science is a very funny thing, it evolves, it develops, and you build upon science. And one of the things I feel about rarity, especially in the future, is that many species in India are not scientifically studied, or their DNA is not studied. So we have got this single species across the entire breadth of India. Let's take the Iora. And if you go into its DNA, there might be 2 or 3 species of Iora for all you know. And one of them might have a very restricted range, then it becomes rare. That is one of the ways rarity comes in. Habitat destruction is one of the most prevalent reasons for rarity happening in India. And collections don't happen in such large scales as they used to during when the British were here, especially in India. So collections is not really a problem. But habitat, population growth, these are some of the reasons why rarity might happen.
But is it all science? Does anyone want to back for art? Intuition?
All right, so for me is definitely an art. No science involved. You just get to know the right people, Shashank, and some more people, right? And things do happen. You have to know guides, right? You know how to basically tell lies in your job, right? Yeah, so you have to do all of that.
No, I'm going to just stop Atul here. There was an art of, of prevarication and the art of procrastination and the art of lying in terms of how to go and seek permission to go off on a twitch. And I'm going to ask Atul to actually elaborate on some of the more elaborate ruses that he has used to go twitching.
Yeah. So, and of course the spouse dimension, right? So that's also very tricky because you can go once, but you can't go continuously, right? And you can't just go for a day, right, on the whim, because you are in the middle of something and suddenly you say, okay, something has turned up somewhere down south and you have to take a flight. So she's of course not amused at all. But I think it's just the adrenal flow. It's just the quest, right? I think that's the two keywords that supersedes anything which exists, at least for a twitcher. That's my perspective.
That's just pure emotion, right? Yeah, true.
About twitchers, can I say something?
Yes, of course.
In England, there are so many that if a rarity is found at one point in the coast, the island tilts.
All right, we are getting there, I think.
Since I'm not an expert, I'm not an ecologist, or I'm not a birder really, I'm a writer. So I think for me it was neither. It was really a quest. It was a mystery that I felt we were solving. I was following Jyotiman Mukherjee, who's this wildlife photographer. I was following Shashank. So it was about the people we met on the field and the little details they told us and how we then mapped this route and hopped from island to island, coast to coast to be able to look for that bird. Two people who were very instrumental in this search were Juglu and Prem, who were locals in Great Nicobar, and they knew the forest like the back of their hand. And when we had access to them, they took us to the wildest places and they charted out our route. And because of them, I think we eventually managed to see the species. So for me, definitely mystery,
art,
quest,
yes.
everything.
Art,
Yeah, and an art perhaps, yes.
So, okay. For me, there are two kinds of birding. One is when I actually go out in the field and watch birds. And second is birding on Google Earth. So, I'm sure Vishnu knows that how much time I spend on Google Earth looking at the right habitat, right places, right elevation, where the bird could be, read about the bird. And I always believe that when someone wants to go out and look for a rare bird, 90% of it is homework. 5% is getting there. And last tiny bit is the luck. When people say, oh, you're so lucky to see this rare bird, there's a lot of time which you spend at home with books, on your computer. Like for example, James's essay is perfect example of this, because when James went and looked for long-billed bush warbler, I remember the number of hours we had discussion with each other, where the bird could be, what kind of habitat it will be in. And eventually, the place where I had seen the bird in India, the agricultural practice had changed. In the sense, the bird breeds in this rumix kind of vegetation. And in India, nowadays, between the fields, now they use these stone bunds, which does not exist on the other side. And that's what triggered the search on Google Earth to find the right habitat. And then people have gone and then James went and found the bird. Similarly, I remember, not a rarity point of view, but there's one birder who, I think there's a bean goose, which was a new bird, which showed up in Alwar 2015. And I wanted to go and see the bird, but the guy who's found the bird was not in touch, he disappeared. And all I could do was look through some Facebook photos. And then I found one wall. Then I went on Google Earth, looked around for the entire Alwar wetland, found the exact wall. Then next day went there, glued my eye to the scope and finally found the bird. But there is a lot of things which happen in the background before you go and find a rare bird or vagrant bird. And that's what makes it more interesting. So I believe it's more science and the art could be the quest itself when you go and see the bird. But there's a lot of things which happen behind the
behind the scenes. Yeah, and I think for all of us who are not so scientifically minded or not willing to put in the hours on Google Earth, so I think and here I just want to turn to Radhika. I know she says sometimes I feel like an outsider in this, and it's terribly hard to find these birds. And if you read her essay, you will see the suffering for her art, so to speak. And I'd like her to share a little bit of that experience over here, because I think that's something that a lot of us who are not so hardcore would be willing to, to empathize with that. Yeah.
Okay. When I first went to Great Nicobar, I had been to forests and I'd been on hikes and walks and I'd been on several jeep safaris, but I had never traveled so far away from civilization. So I was really thrown into the deep end. I didn't know what I was getting into. And then I was traveling with Ridhiman Mukherjee, who's absolutely superhuman on field for those who know him. And then there was Shashank, who just was so at ease in those forests. And the fact that nobody else was struggling, made it worse for me. So just to give you we had to take a flight from Delhi to Port Blair. Then we traveled for 2 days on this cargo cum passenger ship to get to Great Nicobar. And then we traveled to the Galathea coast where we pitched tents along the coast. There was no electricity, there was no running water, there were of course no toilets, there was no internet, there was nothing. And for the first week, I just felt like I was in paradise. It was amazing. And we spent the day looking for the megapod. And in the night, along the same coast, the leatherback shows up to lay its eggs. This is the largest sea turtle in the world. And we'd wait up all night waiting for a female to show up. So absolute magic. But as days went by, I started getting sleep deprived. There was no time to rest. Then there were these sandflies, these horrible, notorious flies. No mosquito net is defense against them. Somebody advised that I use Odomos, so I was using Odomos. Somebody said, try Navratna Tel, so I tried Navratna Tel. Yeah. And by the end of the 10th day, I was smelling of this strange concoction of herbal oil, mosquito repellent, sweat. I was with all men. Nobody spoke about bathing. It was not a conversation. And I got really, really tired. And I didn't know who to complain to. I tried complaining to Shashank and Dhritiman and everybody else in the team, and they just kept telling me about these stories where they had gone to far worse places and had done far more dangerous things. So I was really new.
It's called the Suffering Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And these two are right up there on top of that list.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know, Shashank, if you remember, we had come back to Campbell Bay, which is the only town on Great Nicobar, to of course charge equipment for no other reason. And I quietly snuck out for a bath without telling anybody. And when I came back, everybody was so angry and shocked that I wasted time. So anyway, but it was exhausting, but it was a rite of passage. After 3 weeks, I feel like I looked at everything around me differently. It changed me as a person. I'm far more seasoned now. I know what to expect. I go prepared. But it changed how I looked at the natural world. It changed how I wrote about it. I mean, it gave me fresh eyes to look at everything around me. Yeah. So thank you for that, really.
Atul, any stories of suffering that you would like to share?
Of course, there are hundreds. Hundreds. I think if I have to pick one, right? So actually it's not a suffering, right? So we kind of opened 2 locations for birders because they had no idea how to actually twitch something called Narcondam hornbill, which is found on only one island and not accessible to birders like us who are frivolous or twitchers who are frivolous. So I tried to kind of touch base with a lot of people to get some kind of a permission. We were shooed away by the CCF that okay, you can't go. And then the guy who was actually sailed from Thailand for us, Nick Band, he said, okay, you have to do it Indian way. You carry some liquor bottles and you carry some sweets and magic would happen. Sure, we sail. And I think one thing which is interesting that in a sailboat, we never sailed in our life, right? So in the sailboat, when we were sailing at 6 knots, it's very boring. but it's beautiful. Andaman is beautiful, especially in the night. And he taught us the basics of sailing so that he can take rest. So we were kind of, going after 2 hours, 2 people, and, we took turns. And suddenly we realized that in our odometer, like, was showing 0. So that means he's hitting the rock. I said, oh my God. So we woke him up, and then he came, and then he was also perplexed. And he said, okay, look, something drastically wrong. And then we thought, okay, we are dead. But nonetheless, he said, it's not working. I said, this is all the more issue that it is not working. So that means we are definitely going through a dark space. Anyway, so I think the crux of the whole thing is that there is something called quote-unquote can-do attitude. You have to keep positive and can-do attitude. I think things will fall into your place.
So we've been talking about twitchers. Does everyone understand what a twitcher is? Definition, okay. One thing. The other is about science. There's a lovely essay by Pam Rasmussen about the discovery of the owlet. And that's pure science. Luck plays a part, but its old name was Blow It. So they discovered it after she blew the cover off it, basically.
No, that's a beautiful story in terms of putting the scientific pieces of the puzzle together. Slow, tedious museum work, followed by some very exciting time in the field. So, you do get rewarded, I think. So, but one thing that's really changed, I think we see that sort of transition that happens over the course of the book itself. Like some of the early discoveries were by British naturalists. The players were essentially naturalists who'd come into India during the colonial period, gathered specimens, discovered species, wrote out our lists of flora and fauna. I think that has transitioned now with a lot of the new discovery, new work being done by Indian birdwatchers, biologists, and naturalists, which is a natural transition and is a matter of pride for us as a nation. We've talked about that briefly in the book, in the introduction, but I'm going to turn to Shashank to see whether he wants to sort of elaborate that point and see what the impact of the transition has been.
The way of looking at bird science has changed completely since in last 200 odd years. Before that, it was just collection of specimens, and Britishers who went on these expeditions, they hired local shikaris, local hunters who went and collected for them. And that was like a golden era of discoveries, which happened from 1850s in India till early 1900s. And then there were like a lot of, like Aasheesh and we discussed some time back that how some of the birds they used to describe, and by the time they figure out it's a new species, someone has already described the bird somewhere else because the journals were in far-flung places and they were not accessible for everyone. And most of the descriptions used to be like 1 or 2 lines, nothing more than that. Oh, I went and saw these many birds, these many individuals, and this looks like a new species to science. This continued for a while, but like now the things have changed a lot in terms of data collection, the ecological studies, to even the species description itself. Like for example, earlier it used to be just specimens. Then there was an era where people went looking for the new species in the museum specimens rather than in the field, because people had collected them in the past but without realizing that new species. Then there is an era where people started describing new birds by DNA, and then now there are people are describing birds with the integrative taxonomy, where they are looking at vocalizations, DNA, behavior, morphology, everything put together. And ecological studies itself have changed a lot, right? And then one of the things which I can say that now there are a lot more studies which are done by Indians in India rather than people coming from outside and doing it. So obviously permits are also one of the major factor for that, because they don't get permits now, which is but yeah, there's a quantum leap in terms of how science has progressed in India in the last few decades. Sorry? They're capable of doing that, exactly. And there's a good the papers are also getting published in a very good journal. So there's a massive leap in terms of science itself.
So with all that momentum behind us, so to speak, with the infrastructure, the logistics, access, right? So where will now the new rare birds for India come from? I mean, because has there been so much discovery, and I think it's as Frank writes in his essay. I think India has among the most well-documented avifauna for among the tropical countries. We have a fabulous, history of recorded history of birds in India. I think spanning at least 150 years.
Just to give you an example, from India's independence, it's a Mishmiran babbler, Nicobar's copse owl, Bugun leosicla, Himalayan forest thrush, and depending on taxonomy now, is the Ashambu sholakili.
So
are there just 5 species
since new finds since independence, which means everything was so well documented even before that. Yeah. So is there scope for even finding more rare birds in India? Because surely the quest can't be over.
Yes. There are one good, again, some time back as you said, there are more roads going to the remoter areas now. So few remote, so northeast, or even, for example, I don't know how many of you followed the news about 3 weeks ago that Indian Army wants to open up Galwan Valley for tourism. And if, just to give you a teaser out right now, and if anyone wants to go out and look for a really rare and cool bird, then someone should go to this small, tiny, advanced landing strip called as Daulat Big Goldie. From that airstrip, just 30 kilometers in straight line where the Salim's mountain finch was collected. So that's like one of the birds which went missing for a long time. One of those birds which got described to science from museum specimens later on, which was because they found I think 2 specimens in a Dutch museum, and then the bird was described. So there you go. There's one new bird which it's waiting to be discovered within Indian side. So, and with more roads opening up to the remoter areas, there are more chances of people going and finding these birds. Or, for example, Chinese blackbird. For example, so that's another example because we all know it's kind of giving away a bit of a bit from the book. We all know Western Palearctic migrants which pass through India. How much do we know of Eastern Palearctic migrants which are passing through India? Not much. But if you go and bird in Northeast in winter, in monsoon, or maybe end of around September, October, or again in Andaman Nicobar, it's a great chance of finding these birds. So there are new birds which are probably regular birds which are there in India, which are not yet found. Like for example, how we found Soham is here somewhere. We found red leg crake or very common winter migrant Sakhalin leaf warbler or pale leg leaf.
There's
so many
class
birds.
Of birds.
Yeah,
And I think the concluding essay of the book is a book that answers precisely this question, which is where will the next rare birds for India come from? I think Frank Rind, who's been associated with many bird discoveries across Southeast Asia, I think has created a beautiful framework with specific strategies that birdwatchers in India could adopt to look for to add more species to the India list. So I would urge all birdwatchers to start reading the book backwards first, because clearly that's what your priorities should be. Yeah, you can actually, because the book is arranged chronologically, so you can actually read history backwards. The book works just as well in that direction. But I think also technology is also going to help, right? I mean, we've been talking about using things like acoustic recorders, because we have those now, and we have computer systems that can listen to a lot of sound, decipher the ones that are crucial, and then throw back information on what is passing. And some years ago, there was this wonderful post, I think by Terry Towson, who runs the Birding Beijing feed. And he and his friends, I think last year or 2 years ago, they mounted antennae on top of some of Beijing's tallest buildings. And what they then discovered was there were birds passing over Beijing that were not on any list that anyone had ever, or birds that no one had ever seen. And they only found out because they now had acoustic signals, they had acoustic proof of the birds, they were calling as they migrated over Beijing at night. So, and no one's attempted things like that in India. So we have no idea actually what's happening in the skies over us when it's dark. And that's a wonderful new, realm of discovery. I think that's still waiting, because this story is really far from over.
So we don't even know about migrating flocks. In the US, they use low frequency radar to study flock sizes. It's not allowed in India. Otherwise it's so easily done. It can be so easily done.
Even this experiment of mounting high impact wireless receivers on top of Beijing's buildings, it'll require 2 years of running around government departments to get those permissions, which should scotch the idea even before it comes to be practiced.
Just one more way of finding these rare birds is like, again, in last year when Norman's greenshank was found in India, where satellite tagged bird was tracked from Bangladesh to India, and then birders went out and looked for the bird. Similarly, I'm sure if people keep following the oriental cuckoos, like not the Himalayan cuckoo but the tagged birds, which are, if someone follows them, I'm sure they pass through India sometime
For example, some of the Amurs are now tagged, right?
Yes.
So are people actually following the Amurs? I mean, I haven't seen an Amur, so I'd love to see if I can follow. Can I actually follow a tagged Amur and see my rifle?
I think there's a slight bit of delay, and problem is with the Amur falcon because they just keep moving, right? So if they stay at one place for a long time, yeah, it's possible. But because by the time the data is updated because see, in Greenshank's case, it was very easy because the bird was moving between the islands, right? And then it's wintered there. Here, the bird will keep moving towards Africa. So you have to by the time the data is updated, you are already late by few hours. But the best thing to do is to go there in end of October, early November in Nagaland and just look up in the sky and you will see it.
Far easier and a far more beautiful way
to
see the Amur falcon. Absolutely. So, any other points on where and what could really open up more areas for birding? Atul, what's your prognosis as? Yeah.
Okay, for me, for sure, the unexplored areas in Arunachal, that's something which is still kind of, is out of bounds for various regions. So that's for sure. Second one, what Shashank just talked about, these mountain ranges which were under the, army. So those are basically getting opened for a very strategic reason to get civilians, come over there. But fundamentally, they should also give at least, 1 or 2 birds which are, say, localized in, high reaches, but mostly in the Pakistan area. We probably should get in India as well. I still think nobody has done, except probably Shashank, an extensive birding in Nicobars during the monsoon. I'm sure that, it kind of constantly done. It should give at least few more species. That's my understanding.
So basically lots more birds to be found and many more quests to be written about.
Yep.
Yeah.
So these are all very pointed sort of situations. What I also feel is with the huge increase of birdwatchers in India, with the huge increase in photographers in India, there's a tectonic shift from that time, from when the British were collecting and from Salim Ali's surveys across India. In the 50s and 60s, there was hardly any collecting in India. And, equipment wasn't there, identification skills were very near zero. You had to have the bird in hand to differentiate warblers or gulls, etc. Now with books coming in, photography, and this huge family of digital photographers and birders, birds can be immediately identified right across the globe. The experts are there to. So I think rare birds in India will come from these people also, where, thousands of photographs are being uploaded every day.
And they are. That's precisely how it's happening.
Yes, where there was a lack of eyes, now there is there are many eyes watching.
Recently, Telangana became the first state to have all paradise flycatchers in one place. Like, okay, when we think about paradise flycatcher, there is Indian paradise flycatcher, Blythe's paradise flycatcher, Amur paradise flycatcher, and so there are multiple species. And Telangana became the first state to record all of them, just because birders just went out, photographed the birds, and then kept on asking questions on the identification of their own photographs as well.
Another rare bird here is the classical birder. Nobody believes in the notebook now, and you need a photograph
to prove that you actually saw the bird.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you like what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarunaraj and Raghu Tenkaila. Artwork is designed by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.